So I want to give a lecture on a topic I just had a deep conversation on with a former organizer today, regarding the movement of consciousness in history, and I think it really helped me clarify some of the relationship to Hegel, because I consider Hegel's project to be one of the most important projects in terms of synthesizing historical movement, the relationship of consciousness as it emerges through historical phenomenon, such as the French Revolution or industrial technology or the internet, across periods of time, because we're talking about a changing of consciousness that is technologically, symbolically, linguistically oriented in history. It is a change in the flow of time made possible by human culture and human civilization, which is a second channel of informational technological transformation of human consciousness, as in the neurosomatic body. It is the channel of culture, the channel of historical event, and the channel of revelation, disclosure, as in consciousness technology, which is scaffolding itself through time, relating to itself, as in myself relating to Hegel, or Percy Shelley relating to Plato. This is an iterative process of realization which is made possible by historical event, which is being in time, which is drawing out phenomenologically and revealing something essential about being, as in the apple falling for Isaac Newton, or the French Revolution as the historical moment which makes economic and political systems legible to thinkers like Karl Marx or Engels. So this is really crucial because change in historical time is a revelation. It is an unfolding, whether that is the experience of an individual looking at a Cézanne painting, or the experience of an individual watching the French Revolution executions, which is, and I went over this in great detail actually in my Hack Wilson lecture on the ontology of being as in a phenomenology, that Hack Wilson's swing itself, the American baseball player who was born with an infant alcohol developmental disorder because his mother was an alcoholic. He grew up in a destitute steel town in Pennsylvania in the United States. He makes legible through the power of his swing, in terms of the relationship of his body, which is born through a genetic process, with the interlocution of alcoholism. And he was an alcoholic for his entire life. Fetal alcohol syndrome is the term. And he died of alcoholism when he was just, I believe, around 40 years old, a little younger maybe. His swing, there's a beautiful photograph of his swing, I believe in the season of 1930, where he set the RBI record, runs batted in record for the National League, and I think across the MLB, something like 191 RBIs, which is a significant mark historically. It has never been beaten. Hack Wilson's performance on the baseball field in that season, in spite of and even through his fetal alcohol syndrome, his alcoholism, and his trauma, his swing is captured as he hits one of his home runs, early 40th, mid 40th home run for that season. The might and the power which emerges from such a small and stocky, and the full force of his swing, the full expression of his being through his body in the swing is captured in the photograph. And I will use that for this lecture image because it sums up succinctly, phenomenologically, and this is why the photograph is so important. I'm going to draw this in. The photograph captures memory of phenomenology, that being in time manifested itself in a specific way and has been documented in a direct reflection without the interlocution of interpretation. This is the historical evolution, the cultural technological evolution of photography from painting. Even the extreme realism that was possible through the work of the masters prior to the establishment of photography as a technology which was able to mirror through glass and light the truth of the historical moment captured through the eye of the photographer, which depending on where the camera's gaze was directed, was capable of reflecting at least one perspective of the actual literal physical ground. This is in relationship to quantum mechanics, the formation of the nuclear fusion device, as in the Chicago pile, Newton's gravitational realization, as in the falling of the apple, because what all of these phenomena are knowledge technologies, as in science technologies, cultural technologies, which make visible or make apparent being itself in time. The French Revolution is a realization. It is the historical experience of a realization of the function of the powers that were in being disrupted by a revolutionary counterforce. And this is where Hegel becomes such a crucial factor. The thesis and antithesis towards synthesis theorem, which is a high contrast form of legibility, which I have called in the Hack-Wilson lecture, Chiaroscuro of being in time, which is capturable in the painting or the photograph. It is through high contrast of this balance of light and dark, which is understood deeply by the painter or the artist, or even someone like Charles Baudelaire and La Fleur de Mal. This balance of the light and dark makes legible through appearance, phenomenological appearance of being in time, the character essence of being itself, which I have termed the operator identity and traced across scales from star to human being to cell, as in persistence against constraint, as in the distinguishable pseudo-closed boundary of the body, the membrane, the cell wall, the Great Wall of China, etc., the rise and fall of civilizations, the death of stars, that this is the maintenance of a pseudo-closed boundary against the entropic dissolution, which is the universal principle. That what this intelligibility makes possible, this is history. History itself is the phenomenological appearance of events, being in time. Whether that's Percy Shelley's realization of his metaphysical epic, Prometheus Unbound, or it's Hack-Wilson's swing in his record-setting season of 1930, or it's the French Revolution, or it's the movement of a cell captured by a microscope, or the advent of the car, or a tree distributing seeds in the wind. This emergence is in relationship to neurosomatic transformation, the informational technology of the human genome, or the genome itself, as in a thermonuclear crystallization of energy, which is being transmitted through reproduction or recombination. That human consciousness is a collective historical movement, as is and in all time. The actual literal process of evolution as articulated by Darwin, just as cosmologically the transformation of thermonuclear energy into complex scalar environments with different substrates, which are solving the same problem of persistence against constraint in pseudo-closed systems, and as such, moving through time. In this relationship, which is the relationship to being, which is fundamental and being disclosed at all times through time across all scales. This is making systems legible in historical moments in which there is a high contrast thesis antithesis encounter, such as the French Revolution, extreme class division, or Hack-Wilson's swing, the physical might of someone with fetal alcohol syndrome, performing one of the greatest feats in baseball history, or the explosion of a star, a supernova, the death of a star, makes intelligible this structural operator identity of being itself. In that when we look at human consciousness as a transformation, as in Marx witnessing the French Revolution, or Einstein reading Clerk Maxwell on thermodynamics and space-time relations, magnetism, or reading Newton on gravity, Newton having the experience of gravity revealed to him phenomenologically through the apple, that human consciousness is a collective historical movement toward intelligibility. And we also witness this through Darwin's major breakthrough. There's no real way to describe how deep time conscious Darwin becomes and realizes in human history. which is to say evolution as a principle occurring through the genome, the evolution of species, the evolution of man, the making intelligible of deep time, deep historical time, which is, of course, in relationship to cosmological time, the crystallization of the genome through thermonuclear energy as a process of transformation from the elemental forge of stars, stellar fusion, which comes around full circle in the early part of modernity, which is to say mid-20th century, with Fermi and the Chicago pile, the creation of the fusion device. In microcosm, realizing the structural law of nuclear fusion and making possible a reproduction of it at scale, which is the human scale, the human historical scale. Technology, science, philosophy of history, the camera, Hegel, the internet, the computational device. This is a clarification of perception, of real function, which is to say what is being in time. This is what is meant by knowledge is power, or to know thyself, which is to say knowledge is the real relationship of being in time. It is functional, it is physical, and as such, it is the articulation through scientific method of inquiry into the process of creating technological systems, which is the advent of fire, it is the printing press, it is the internet. It is through leveraging structural realization, as in scientific discovery. Again, Newton, Maxwell, Shannon, Einstein, Planck, Fermi, that these processes, you could say Galileo, that these processes actually reorient the human being structurally toward realization of how the physical, which is to say the literal being in time of existence, functions, and then to leverage that function technologically, as in the creation of devices and prostheses which make possible an enhanced perception of life or an enhanced experience of life through the device, through the instrument, as in the internet or the computer, or nuclear fusion energetic production, or the car. And this is the descendant from Carnot in the work on thermodynamics, Clausius. These are setting in place the understanding of these structural laws of existence, from which technological innovation can occur and does occur historically. It is the harnessing of the energy which is latent and made possible and realizable through knowledge production. True knowledge production, as in the literal process of being in time, which is realized structurally, as in Newton or Einstein. So this is self-knowledge itself as the grand historical synthesis not only of human being and civilization, but of cosmos, as process and progress emergent through historical time, as in evolution, technology, science, etc., through the emergence of technology, which is the genome, which is language, which is the printing press. This is the creation and making accessible of knowledge, internet, books, etc. So this emergence allows for transformation at species scale. So that knowledge is discovered, that knowledge is created, as in genomic evolution. Knowledge is discovered, as in the intellectual process of uncovering structurally being in time. Anything from thermodynamics to quantum mechanics to gravity to the metaphysical disclosure of Percy Shelley or Socrates or Spinoza. This is an iterative process which allows for transformation at species scale, which changes the way that human beings are organized, how they act, how they behave, and how they come together. This is as present as the AT&T lines which make possible national television in the mid-20th century. It is literally wiring up or rewiring neurosomatically the grid of the human experience through a reorientation. Again, historically, systems are made legible through events such as the falling of the apple, as it is perceived by Isaac Newton, and it's critical that Isaac Newton perceives this because he has the neurosomatic technology to make legible the structural phenomena behind the appearance, as in Marx witnessing the French Revolution. That historical time unfolding is essentially time-dilated loop of repetition of the same structural phenomena until there is an evolutionary phase change, either at the level of the genome, which is to say the thumb or the forebrain, or at the level of information technology, as in civilization or culture, science, literature, which is thrown into the stream of history and historical time, this deep time glacial phase change, which is natural to species-level evolution as articulated by Darwin. But this historical phenomena, whether it's Shelley's text, which is produced by pirate presses in the face of English empirical censorship, or it's Darwin's Gravity, which is, again, published by distributors and moved around the globe and then published on the internet when the grid of the internet is set up. As a unification and condensation of space and time at scale, wiring up information technology, which is made legible through personal computational devices in the latter part of the 20th century and into the 21st, that this spread and distribution of structural information is the making intelligible of being across various different disciplinary silos, which themselves are fundamentally unified, as we discussed in the last lecture with McLuhan's letter to Norman Weiner, that these various different disciplines are uncovering So, in the McLuhan letter to Norbert Weiner, what we're talking about is the realization, which is occurring critically as modernity approaches late phase, that the disciplinary digs, for lack of a better word, or the disciplinary existential projects of uncovering everything from biochemistry to the existential explorations of Rimbaud into the human psyche and how consciousness is changed through languaging, that these processes are all revealing at root a profound structural integrity, which I've termed the operator identity, which is persistence against constraint, that even industrial factory technologies, which are producing and transforming energy through metallic structures or vacuums, etc., which are themselves the rigging up of industrial devices, are obeying these same fundamental laws and are existing within the same fundamental constraint structures and architectures which exist across stars and cells, and the exploration of the human existential consciousness, the being of the human being in time, which is the experience of constraint, which is being felt by a neurosomatic evolutionary sensitivity. This is what is meant by the insertion of consciousness into history and the exponential revolution that occurs in modernity through the industrial factorial grid, which is, again, fossil fuel technology, as well as the quantum mechanical revolution, which is the phase change or the paradigm transformation from Newtonian physics into energetic physics. The physics of the energy, which thermodynamics itself is the bridge. And so, without these critical insertions, humanity itself would exist in a lockstep with evolutionary technology, which is the deep time transformation of the genome, and all that culture, civilization, and knowledge is across the human historical record, which is in reality quite small, in relationship to cosmological time, is the process of self-realization through genomic architectures in time. So that these genomic architectures emerge, which is to say maybe it's Newton, or maybe it's Maxwell, or maybe it's Payne-Gaposchkin, and are exposed phenomenologically to historical return, which is simply the process of being in time unfolding across scales. And there is the measured inquiry into phenomena, which is to say, how does phenomena occur? Why does it occur? And in these high contrast states, such as the explosion of a star or the French Revolution or the steam engine for Carnot, there becomes articulatable realization of how the process functions. The apple itself falling from the tree, Newton's neurosomatic body experiencing this phenomena unfolding naturally, being articulated by nature, gleaming through the appearing history, which is itself something that has been occurring for millennia, for billions of years. But that this is articulated in the ripe moment of the interlocution of the neurosomatic technology of the human being, which is capable of realizing structurally what is occurring, as in the French Revolution or the apple, and making the underlying systems intelligible of each of these seemingly disparate historical, phenomenological, being-in-time events, and the accumulation of this knowledge base is itself what makes superstructurally the articulation of the operator identity, as in pseudo-closed systems persisting within the constraint universe of entropic dissipation, legible. And that in this collective historical movement towards intelligibility, whether that's technology, science, or philosophy of history, the dropping of these knowledge technologies into the stream, and the making available of everything from the internet to the printing press, the cheap personal computational device, or access to these grids of information, makes possible this increasing complexification of the human being encounter with existence itself. That the scaffolding is simultaneously neurosomatic, as it is global cultural, as in information production, self-knowledge, process and progress emergent through historical time and made increasingly available, as in this grid of self-realization through technology. And this itself, to return to Hegel, is working at the practical, literal level of the transformation of history, which is to say thesis, antithesis, synthesis, that in these historical moments of profound legibility through high contrast, again, the French Revolution is a fantastic example, as is Hack Wilson, this momentous break is what produces, and we see this even after the French Revolution, a profound innovation across fields and disciplines of human knowledge, specifically as it is located in Europe and the surrounding areas of France. Because this is a moment of profound historical legibility which reaches locally, as in the literal historical event, a maximum amount of individuals, or near a theoretical maximum amount of individuals due to the constraints at hand and the time. And this is also an event that seeps into the surrounding European milieu and moves into the Americas, as in the founding process of America, or the United States of America itself. This is critical. So when we have these historical revolutions, such as Enlightenment thought or the Renaissance, These are moments of economic, political, social change through high contrast energetic transformation. When we see the French Revolution, what we're seeing is the profound class inequality, which is an economic as well as an existential energetic condition of the availability of bread. In this extremity of the energetic political condition of this division, of this gulf, produces the apparent phenomenological realization. As in Hack Wilson's swing. And all that is required is the presence of the neurosomatic sensitivity to grasp through these high contrast historical moments, even just the appearance of nature, which is Hölderlin's nature's gleaming is higher revealing. This requisite sensitivity to perceive structurally through the appearance, as in light, the literal phenomenological appearance of history, which is the contrast of light, which makes legible and intelligible movement of being, which is beings or architecture or nature, or the literal physical movement of the French Revolution as it occurs in space and time, which then is the vehicle of realization. Shelley's encounter with Mont Blanc. This is a high contrast experience of light with a geological body, a configurational body, which is the mountain of stone, and Shelley's regulatory experience neurosomatically of encountering this majestic mountain, which reflects back upon him this question of how is he capable of experiencing this? And the answer is regulational architecture that is highly sensitive to the experience of encountering this deep time constraint form, which is the mountain of stone. The possibility of making legible occurs in this relationship, this dialectical relationship between the neurosomatic body, these highly sensitive genetic organisms which emerge and are capable of, whether it's Newton or Shelley or Marx, whether it's the falling apple, the encounter with Mont Blanc, or the French Revolution, capable of encountering the cyclical process of being in time, which is a structural articulation, time and time again, phenomenological appearance of the underlying operational self, which is being across all scales, and perceiving structurally and superstructurally what is occurring. That the apple is not simply just moving. The apple is falling in a gravitational relationship with the earth. This is intelligibility. In that these streams, these cultural streams, which are the articulations of these experiences, Newton, Shelley, Darwin, of these excursions into the relationship of being in time, which creates the intelligible phenomenological world or the phenomenological self, are themselves then the technological, social, political, cultural conditions which make possible a fundamentally different relationship of humanity to itself, to being and to world, as in self-knowledge. Process and progress emergent through historical time, through technological emergence, which is the articulation of the underlying principles of existence, which are then formalized, as in laws, physical laws of being, structural laws, metaphysical laws, and then formulated as in instruments, which then are at work in the world and transform the human being's relationship to nature, to time, to self, as in Rimbaud's poetry, as in the aqueduct, as in the internet. That all of these technologies emerge from scientific law, which then creates the possibility of technological intervention, which is replication of this underlying being of nature law, which is observed through time by these neurosomatic genomic architectures, observed therein, developed as instruments in historical time, enter the time of history, and alter via the literal, civilizational, cultural architectures, which are the relationships of beings, the course of history. And this, again, it occurs in two parts as I've formulated the two channels. Channel 1 is genomic architecture, which is the deep time exchange, reproductive exchange of genomes, which make intelligible being, history, time, neurosomatic architectures existing in the flow of time, experiencing the flow of time, and making legible the superstructural relationships beneath the phenomenological appearance of time. This is the flow of channel 1 information, which is genomic informational technological information, thermonuclear crystallization, into the information technology of symbology, which is the interlocution of technologics, prosthetics, books, instruments into the flow of historical time, which is disrupting and changing the being's neurosomatic relationship to existence itself. It is changing the literal architectural appearance of being, and it is enhancing, whether it's the microscope or the internet or the articulation of gravity, enhancing the being's relationship to its own experience of time, which is actually changing the way that the aperture of the neurosomatic genomic self experiences reality, which then changes action. And this is the revolution of history. The enhancing of the clarity of perception of the real function and character of nature, and furthermore therein what it is to be human, as itself this being within time, as a neurosomatic genetic architecture, which is a deep time process of transformation and an articulation of this complex form, which includes the forebrain and the hindbrain, which is the emergence of consciousness, the emergence of the possibility of intelligibility through these historical events which would be veiled in darkness without the possibility of perception, as in Marx's structural articulation of what occurs in the French Revolution and why, or Newton's structural articulation of what occurs in the falling of the apple, as in gravity and why, or Shelley's metaphysical articulation of Prometheus Unbound, why the human being experiences constraint and suffering not only historically, as in civilizationally, through empires, through oppression, but also in the human being's relationship to the body itself, as in a solution space, a constraint architecture, which has fundamental limits, as in being in time, an entropic universe, an organism with organ systems, and a nervous system which must regulate energetic throughput. This collective combined clarity of perception as the human historical project of consciousness itself, historical movement towards intelligibility, technology, science, philosophy of history, is the emergence of a full spectrum clarity of perception. Again, towards the real function and character of nature and existence, what it is to be human. And this is the movement in history, which is the emergence of the possibility of a total knowledge, which again we've articulated in terms of the operator identity across all scales. Persistence against constraint in the pseudo-bounded or the pseudo-differentiated being in time, which is rapidly experiencing, if it is a regulational technology, regulational informational technology, the escaping of energy and the necessity of persisting against this escaping entropic condition via metabolism, holding the body together, which is itself a process of energetic difficulty, and the experience which is articulated through this, which is the existential experience of consciousness itself. To experience the human being therein is to experience the total cosmological, structural, metastructural reality, of persistence against constraint, which is being articulated through a specific substrate, which is an informational technology which has reached a period of recursion or self-realization, the ability to observe itself, or the ability to observe the relations of being in time, to find their structural simile across all perceived different substrates, which themselves are just energetic structures in various different fields of persistence, whether configurational or regulational, as in stone or cell or star, and to understand the fundamental movement beneath and between all of them, which is the articulation of being the true self, again, the character of nature and what it is to be human. And this movement of history, which is simultaneously genomic, as it is informational technological in terms of symbol and culture, is unto this recursion, as in the literal evolution of the human being, as an architecture, neurosomatic architecture, the brain, the thumb. This possibility of recursion, again, the Gutenberg Bible or the internet, which is the expansion of possibility against and within the constraint of space and time in the human body, to realize self, to make articulatable and articulate, to understand superstructurally what it is being, what it is to be, which is only made legible through time, which is the observation of historical process, cosmological process, French Revolution process. Change in historical time makes legible being. And that these neurosomatic architectures are capable of perceiving being in time and articulating the underlying principle. And this acceleration, which is hyper-accelerated into modernity, via the phase change which occurs, which is Newton into thermodynamics, into quantum mechanics, it is an entire energetic explosion of the possibility of making legible, which then becomes technologies from the atom bomb to the internet. The articulations of Shannon in terms of informational technology itself, which is an incursion ever deeper toward this fundamental supersubstrate identity, which is functioning across all of these different perceived differences. Rimbaud's excursion into the human mind, or quantum mechanics, or the computer, or geology, or cellular biology. And with this realization in hand, it is itself the emergence into the bloodstream of humanity, simultaneously genomic and historical, the possibility, within real clarity of perception, the real function and character of nature, what it is to be human, of actually changing history itself toward intelligibility, which then is the perfecting movement of architectural possibility, which then becomes civilizations, codes, laws, religions, cultures, whatever it may be, which is in ever more perfect relationship to being, as in harmony, superstructural harmony with being itself, which the human being is a manifestation of, as is all things. So this is a movement toward harmony, which is emerging through this catastrophe or cataclysm or crisis of historical revelation, which is the process of overturning of paradigms, overturning of cultures, civilizations, and linguistic, philosophical, and scientific orders, religious orders, which were themselves historical placeholders for the emergence of total intelligibility, which is recursion at the level of being, which itself is manifest across all scales. And this is itself the cosmological and human historical movement of time. Again, genomically as an information technology, crystallization of thermonuclear energy, and the process of human history as everything from the Gutenberg Bible to the fusion device of Chicago Pile. And that this is the movement toward and unto revelation, which is a process of unfolding of these different disciplinary silos, which is intensified in the alienation and siloing process of modernity, which is the in-depth exploration of the energetic substrate or the operator identity substrate, which is at work through all of these different microcosms and macrocosms, which are then unified and unifiable in understanding the structural behavior, the structural function, the structural being behind these various different perceived fields, as in cellular biology or the star or the relations of human beings in history. And that unto this revelation, which is the unification at the level of the superstructural, which is I've described as the operator identity, it makes possible a total phase change, paradigm-shifting transformation of human relations and the human relationship to nature itself, because it is the disclosure of being at the level of total architecture. Human being at the deepest level, which is the universal or the cosmological self, but also being in terms of the real architectural function of nature, which then makes possible an energetic liberation. It's a thermonuclear, thermodynamic liberation, which, working within the real architectural constraints of existence themselves and understanding them structurally, then there is a historical change. That once these systems themselves are made legible and they're no longer ideological, theoretical, or belief systems, they actually are now physically legible, not only in terms of law, but real function, and that technologies can be made in relation to them to function better, more cleanly, as clear channels of energetic transformation and the relationship to energy within constraint in a thermonuclear universe or thermodynamic universe across scales. This makes possible and available the creation of a best possible society or best possible civilization or best possible living human relationship to being itself. And this is the goal of all life, not only to persist, which is to survive, which is, of course, the history of humanity and of life forms on Earth, but to persist well. To not only to survive, but to thrive. And thriving is only possible with superstructural understanding. Otherwise, there is a blind articulation, a blind expression, and a blind struggle against relations and forces and dynamics which are otherwise unintelligible. And this is the revelation of gravity or the revelation of evolution as a historical process, as in Darwin. It is making intelligible the otherwise veiled or dark, as in the French Marx making intelligible the process of the French Revolution, how and why it happens. Otherwise, these historical processes would be entirely darkened to consciousness and would be repeating themselves without humanity or human history itself, as in a global community of neurosomatic architectures which are experiencing life within a perceptual ceiling, without making available structurally the movement of being in time, and thus making possible an interaction or reaction or action towards it differently. This is revelation or disclosure as it occurs through various different disciplinary silos and historical events and historical figures who are making legible systems at the level of superstructure. And this is what changes the course of history. And it is made possible by neurosomatic genomic evolution, which produces architectures capable of clarity of perception of the real function and character of nature. And as such, making available, whether it is Rimbaud, Marx, Newton, Darwin, what it is to be human, what it is to exist, and what is being super and metastructurally behind, beneath, and within the flow of time. Thank you.